So I was very thankful. This sucks. Okay. Hi friends! Okay, so today's video is going to be a little different, a little bit more serious. Today is October 15th, and if you don't know the significance of this day, it is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. This is something that I think is really important. Last week I watched a video by Maureen from Glitter and Groceries, and she just recently suffered a miscarriage, unfortunately, and it really inspired me to make this video this week. It's something that I've been thinking about for a while, but I didn't know that I had the courage to actually do it. I see people like Colin and Katie talk so openly about their miscarriage at the time when they were going through 2 losses. Just the fact that they could be so open on YouTube was just incredible, and then seeing Maureen do the same thing was just really inspiring. The reason I think that this is important is because I have had 2 miscarriages, but my first one no one knew about except for my husband and I for a long time. It wasn't something that I was comfortable talking about openly because I was actually ashamed at the time, which I'll get more into that in a little bit. But whenever I had a miscarriage, the first time, I felt really alone. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know who I could talk to about it, and I didn't know anyone in my personal life who had had a miscarriage because it's not something that we talk about openly. So that's why I'm making this video, to hopefully spark some conversation. I just tried making this video and my thoughts were everywhere, so I have my handy dandy notebook where I wrote down kind of what happened in order so that I can hopefully get my thoughts across the right way. So we'll see if this is any better. Okay, so I'm gonna try starting from the beginning. When my husband and I first got married, if you don't know, we got married very young, and I was ready to have kids almost immediately. Like, I've been down to have babies forever. But my husband was a little bit more reserved. He wanted to wait. He wanted for us to, grow up a little bit, have some time to ourselves, be more financially stable. He wanted to be able to focus on his career for a few years. And so when we first got married, we decided to wait before having kids. I went on birth control. Anytime you go on birth control, you're supposed to be very careful that first month and use extra forms of protection and, just be really cautious. And so we did that, but I switched birth control a lot. My body doesn't respond to birth control well, and so I was always switching, trying to find something that would work for my body. So each time we were really careful, and we didn't think that we would ever get pregnant during that time. So my first pregnancy was a complete shock and surprise. I have PCOS, and so my periods have always been very irregular. They've always been really heavy. There's always been really bad cramping, and so I didn't know that I was pregnant because I wasn't late. I mean, it had been a while since my last period, but first of all, I was on new birth control, which throws things out of whack. I have PCOS, so, things were just weird. I was having some abnormal bleeding, like it was lasting a lot longer than normal, and it was a little bit heavier, but I didn't think that much about it. I really thought it had to do with the hormonal changes of birth control. But then whenever I started to have clotting, I started to really worry about it. I still didn't think it was pregnancy or miscarriage or whatever. Like, I was worried about the way birth control was affecting my body, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so I tried getting in to see my doctor, and if you know how military hospitals are, it takes a really long time to get an appointment. Normally appointments are like 3 or 4 weeks out. And so I called 2 days in a row to see if there were any cancellations, any way that I could get in earlier, and I couldn't. So I told my husband that I wanted to go to the emergency room just to be seen so that I could get things fixed with my birth control, see what was going on. This was either June or July of 2011. My husband was about to go on his second deployment. So yeah, we went to the emergency room. And I had done like some Googling, you know, and with my symptoms, like they kind of pointed to miscarriage, but of course it's Google, so I just kind of took that with a grain of salt, and I didn't think that I was pregnant in the first place because I had been on birth control for so long. We went to the ER, and I told them, you know, my symptoms, and I told them that, you know, online it said that this pointed to miscarriage, but I really didn't feel like I was having a miscarriage. But they wanted to do a urine sample anyway, and they wanted to do a blood sample. And so I knew then it was going to be a long wait. So like they triaged me and they did like my labs and stuff, and then we went into the waiting room. We were just waiting for a long time. And still, I didn't think that there was anything wrong. I thought that I was gonna go in and they were gonna either take me off birth control or put me on a different one. So I wasn't really concerned as we were waiting. I just knew it was gonna take a long time. So when they called me back to see the ER doctor, but they wanted to go ahead and do a pelvic exam and an internal ultrasound. And so they did. I didn't know at the time that the reason they wanted to do that was because the results of my pregnancy test had been positive. So I thought that they just were doing like just a pelvic exam. So and of course they didn't see anything. They didn't see a heartbeat or anything like that. And so the doctor, like, he looked around a lot, and so he didn't say anything for a while, and I remember that kind of made me feel weird. That's when I started to think that something might be wrong. So he's cleaning up the instruments from the exam, and he's like taking his gloves off, and he just looks like he's in a hurry. And he says, okay, well, the results of your pregnancy tests were positive. However, the pelvic exam and the ultrasound, they don't show any signs of a fetus. And so it's possible that you miscarried this morning, that you released the tissue this morning. And I just remember thinking, like, how could someone be so callous about a baby? Like, that was my baby. I didn't know that I was pregnant. I never saw those 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. I didn't even know. And so for someone to just drop a bomb like that and then just walk out of the room was like, what? So that completely took me off guard. And my husband had stayed in the waiting room because, again, I didn't think there was anything wrong, and he doesn't really like hospitals, and so I just told him to stay in the waiting room and that I would be back. So when I went to the waiting room and I saw him sitting there, like, I kind of made eye contact with him and told him that I was done, but I didn't say anything until we got in the car. And then as soon as we got home, I just broke down. I was mourning for a pregnancy that I didn't even know existed. At that point, I felt really ashamed because in my mind, I was thinking, I am a woman. My body is designed to carry babies, and it failed to do that. And so I felt a lot of shame and embarrassed that this is something that I was going through. So I didn't tell anyone. I told my husband not to tell anyone. but I had a really hard time with it. Of course, you know, I had been wanting a baby, even though we weren't trying yet. And, you know, my husband, he wasn't ready yet. And so for him, it wasn't the same thing. It didn't really feel like a loss. I don't mean it like that. I just mean, like, he didn't take it as hard as I did. And so he didn't really know how to be there for me. He didn't know how to support me because he couldn't understand really what I was going through. Just like that emotion of not knowing I'm pregnant, thinking it's just issues with birth control, just a weird period, and then finding out that you miscarried is just a nightmare. And so he did end up calling his mom, I think the next day, and telling her what was going on, mainly asking, like, what in the world do I do? She won't stop crying. And so she was the only person who knew for a long time. I didn't talk about it for probably 2 years. And still I don't talk a whole lot about it, and I don't open up a lot about it because it was a really dark time in my life. Just the depression that I was going through after that miscarriage, it really messed me up. So yeah, I don't talk a lot about it. Okay, fast forward to August of 2013. So just over 2 years later, my husband and I were ready to start trying to conceive. And he had just got back from his 4th deployment, and so we were really excited to start trying. Logically, I knew that it could take a while. We didn't want to put a lot of pressure because we knew that we might be in this for the long haul, but still, that next cycle, I remember being crushed when I got my period, because I thought for sure that I would be pregnant right away. Like, just in my mind, I felt like, well, yeah, like, I want this so bad. Why wouldn't I be pregnant? And so I took it really hard that we weren't getting pregnant right away. And so in January of 2014, we decided to kind of take a break and not put so much pressure on it. Just enjoy each other's company. My husband was going to be doing a lot of different schools and just different courses and stuff that he had to do. So we decided, you know, just to take a break while he was in those schools, and that we would try, like, start really trying again when he was done. So of course, you know, like they say, as soon as you stop trying, that's when you get pregnant. And so that's what happened to me. The end of February, it's February 27th, we had a women's Bible talk, and like, I had just got home from it. It was kind of late. It was like 10 o'clock at night. Britt was out of town, and so I wanted to, you know, have a glass of wine and watch some Netflix, you know, just enjoy, you know, an evening doing girly stuff. And so because we've been trying to conceive, I was in the habit of, before I had any kind of alcohol, that I would take a pregnancy test just to be on the safe side. And so anyway, I took that test, and I walked out of the bathroom before even looking at it, because I had seen so many negative tests. Like, I was not expecting a positive at all. So I got a phone call from one of my good friends, and I was on the phone with her for a while. We had been on the phone for like 15 minutes whenever I finally went back in the bathroom, for the purpose of throwing the test away. Like, I already knew that it was going to be negative, and I was going to throw the test away and then pour a glass of wine and then whatever. And so I go into the bathroom, and I see this test with 2 bright pink lines, just like so dark. I still have it, but I think maybe it's gross to show on camera. But they were really dark, and I was in shock. Like, I was confused. I didn't know how in the world I got a positive pregnancy test. And so then I thought, no, this is an evap. Like, it's an evaporation line. It's a faulty test. Like, there's no way, because I've been on the phone for 15 minutes, and so it went over the time limit. Like, that's really what I thought. Even though it was, like, bright pink and very dark. Like, obviously not an evap, but I just couldn't believe it. Like, I didn't think it was real. It was weird that I took a test and got a positive that late at night anyway. And so I really didn't know how I was going to get another positive that late. But I also couldn't go to sleep not knowing if this was real. So I drank some water, and I decided to do an 1.5 hour hold, which is not very long. So I thought, like, maybe it would show up, and if it doesn't, then I'll try again in the morning. And so yeah, I waited an 1.5 hours. I took both tests, and they were positive immediately. Like, I watched, like, this is gross, as the urine, like, passed over the test line, it came up pink, like, immediately. And I couldn't believe it. Like, I was so ecstatic. This was on a Thursday, and my husband was out of town until Friday night, and he would get home, like, late that night. So I got the positives, and the next morning I immediately went to the hospital, or to the clinic that I went to, and I asked for a pregnancy confirmation as well as a blood confirmation, because I wanted those initial HCG levels. And so I got both tests and went home, and they told me to call back in 2 hours. On the way home, I had actually got a digital pregnancy test, and so that said pregnant. I called back, and they said that it was positive. And I just remember at that point, when someone else told me, like, I had taken 4 pregnancy tests, and I didn't believe it. But when that guy on the phone told me that my test was positive, I just cried. And it was like the best day of my entire life. And so I was really excited to surprise my husband that night, and tell him that we were pregnant. And so I put together, like, this little box, and it had some tissue paper in there, and then I put the pregnancy test in there with also just, like, a little card that said player 3 joining October 2014. My husband and I are big gamers. So we got home, and, you know, it was really exciting being able to tell him that we were pregnant, and I couldn't believe it, that we weren't even trying, and that it just happened, and I was just amazed. I had talked to a couple of my friends, like, told them, and I found out that 2 of my other friends were pregnant too, due around the same time that I was. I didn't know how far along I actually was, but I was basing it on the weeks estimator from my digital pregnancy test. And so that's the unfortunate thing about PCOS. You never actually know what your due date is. Anyway, so we were due right around the same time, and it was really exciting. And so then that Sunday afternoon, I started to feel some cramping. It wasn't anything horrible, but it was only on one side, and so I was kind of freaked out about an ectopic pregnancy. And so I told my husband that it would just ease my mind a little bit if we went to the ER just to find out what they thought, just to ease my mind. Like, I knew that nothing would show up on ultrasound at that point, but I was hoping that they could just rule out ectopic pregnancy. And so so we went to the ER, and they did a bedside ultrasound, and they couldn't see anything. They couldn't find like a heartbeat or anything like that, and so they said like I could still be really early, which at that point I was only like 4.5 weeks pregnant. And so they wanted to send me down to radiology just to be sure. They wanted to see if they could see anything because they have better equipment, see if they could see anything, and also try to rule out ectopic pregnancy. So we went down to radiology, and of course they can't tell me anything. She had the screen turned toward her, and they can't give you the results. So I went back to the room that I was in at the ER and waited some more, and they had taken blood before that, and luckily I had got that first blood test with HCG, so they had something to compare it to. And so they came back in and said, well, your levels have risen since Friday, but not as much as we would hope, given this amount of time, but they have risen, so that's a good sign. But unfortunately in the ultrasound we couldn't see anything, but you're still early along, so it's probably nothing to worry about for ectopic pregnancy. And they said it didn't seem like it was an ectopic, so that was good. So they wanted me to come in that Wednesday to be tested again for HCG to make sure it's rising, and then also see if maybe they could find something on ultrasound, which that was only like 3 days, I think. So I went to that first appointment. My husband had to go back out of town for his school. I got there early to do more lab work, and I went upstairs and they had to see me in OB, and so I was surrounded by pregnant women, and I was trying to hold on to hope that everything was fine, but I had already started to feel some doubts. And so I went into that appointment, and she said that my HCG had continued to rise, but again, not as much as they would have liked, but it had risen, so that was a good sign. And so then they did an ultrasound, and these are all internal ultrasounds. And so they did the ultrasound at the bedside, and she said she didn't see anything. And so she sent me down to radiology, and they didn't see anything. So they still tried to say, that I was early along, and that maybe that was why nothing was showing up on ultrasound, and to not like give up hope. And they wanted to reschedule for a week later to test me again. I had asked the doctor about progesterone because I do have PCOS. I asked her if they were willing to check it to see if if I was low, and she basically told me that that's not very likely. She told me that like that probably wasn't what was going on, that I was just early, and basically just made me feel like I didn't know what I was talking about, even though I know that a lot of women with PCOS have low progesterone, but she still made me feel like I didn't know what I was talking about. And so then I thought maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. And so she said that she wasn't going to check me, which, looking back now, like I'm kind of really upset about, because even if she had prescribed me progesterone, it wouldn't have hurt. Like, I don't know if it would have helped, but I know it wouldn't have hurt. So I'm kind of still frustrated that she didn't even check my progesterone levels to see if that's what was going on. So after this appointment, I was alone, like I had said, and I when I got back to the car, I just sat in there and I just cried and I yelled and I prayed and I was just furious. I yelled at God because I felt like, why did I have to see that positive pregnancy test? Like, I felt like I was given something and then it was ripped away. So I was there for probably 15-20 minutes just crying. And I just remember I felt so alone. I didn't know what to do. I hated that I went to that appointment alone. So a week later, this is March 12th now, I went for my second appointment. Again, I was gonna have to go alone because my husband's out of town. So he asked my friend if she'd be willing to go with me, and of course she said yes. And she had her 2 kids with her, and so she took me to my appointment, and it was a long day. We went up to my appointment and they did an ultrasound again, and she said that she didn't see anything. There was one point where she kind of focused on one area for a while and she took a lot of pictures of that area, but then she said like she couldn't confirm that there was anything there. So then she wanted me to go down to get lab work done to check my HCG. And then after that, she told me to just like wait around and not like go too far, because then I could come back in and she would see me again that afternoon and check me then. So we went downstairs, got my lab work done, and then me and my friend and her 2 kids went to McDonald's, and we were just trying to keep my mind off of everything. Luckily, her kids are like the most hilarious kids in the whole wide world, and so we just laughed and just stayed busy for like an hour and a half, somewhere around there. And then I called and she said that my labs were in and we could go back in. And so we went back upstairs, and she said that, so again, it had risen, but not as much as they would have liked. And so then she sent me back down to radiology to get an ultrasound from them. And of course, again, they couldn't tell me what's going on. The screen was turned away from me. And when I went back upstairs, basically she said that she had seen what she thought was a gestational sac, and that's why she wanted me to go down to radiology, and radiology had confirmed that they saw a gestational sac. However, they didn't see a yolk sac and they didn't see a baby. So at that point, she felt very confident that that it wasn't ectopic or anything like that, and that I still had a chance. And again, she didn't even think about my progesterone or anything like that, which again, I don't know if at that point it would have helped at all. Probably not, but it didn't seem like she was willing to do anything, which I know there's not anything that doctors can really do, but it just felt like it wasn't important, I guess. It was just a waiting game. So then she said, you know, we can schedule an appointment for you to come back in a week, or we can wait 2 weeks and give this baby a chance to grow and, you know, show themselves. And so I opted for the 2-week plan. But before then, it was March 21st. I just, all of a sudden, I realized that I didn't have any more symptoms. Like, I'm sure they didn't just stop like immediately, but that's the day that I noticed. Like, I didn't have any kind of nausea. I wasn't like tired all the time. My breasts weren't tender, and so that's when I kind of started preparing myself mentally that things were just not going to progress. And so I tried just going on about things normally, but I kind of lost hope. Then that Tuesday, March 25th, we went to church. Our church midweek was on Tuesday nights. And at church, it was like right after service, I went to the bathroom and I started to bleed. And I started having pretty bad cramps. And at that point, I knew that there was nothing I could do. This whole time I had held on to like the tiniest little bit of hope that things might change and work out in our favor. But at that point, obviously, I knew that I was miscarrying. And I had an appointment for the next morning, so I tried to just keep track of everything that was going on. And I hadn't noticed any clotting at that point or anything. And so it was mainly just bleeding and cramping. So the next day, I went to my doctor's appointment, and she confirmed that my HCG had, the levels had fallen pretty severely. They were still elevated, indicating pregnancy, but they had fallen a lot from the last time that I'd gone. And so so at that point she was able to confirm that I was miscarrying, and based on what was already happening, the fact that I was already bleeding, she was confident in the fact that I wouldn't have to have a D&C, that I would just miscarry naturally. So as terrible as it is, I'm very thankful that the next day I miscarried naturally at home. So I was very thankful. This sucks. Okay. So I was very thankful that I was able to miscarry at home naturally, and my symptoms like went away almost immediately. Like, my cramping went away almost immediately, and the bleeding slowed down tremendously. And so I was thankful to be done with the physical part of it, but emotionally it took me a really long time to begin healing. I wouldn't say that I've healed, still a process. But luckily I had an amazing support system, friends, and my husband knew so much better how to care for me. And I think the biggest thing is that I was very open and honest about my miscarriage. That day on the 26th that it was confirmed officially that I was miscarrying, I let people know what was going on. I told them, and since then I've been very honest and open about what's going on. When people ask, I let them know. I wish that I had more answers about why I've had 2 miscarriages, and why we've had so much trouble trying to conceive other than just PCOS. I wish I had some real concrete answers, As far as why I miscarried this time, they call it a spontaneous abortion, which is pretty much the worst thing in the world to hear. Of course, I know it's like a medical term, but still, like, just, I don't know, I guess the connotation of that word, like, so basically what that is just a misalignment of chromosomes that cause the baby to not thrive. And they say it's just one of those things that happens. It is the most common cause for miscarriage. Most people don't even know why they miscarry. So that's what it is for me. Obviously, this is still a really hard thing to deal with. I'm still learning how to cope and deal with this. It's like each month, each year is a new milestone. That first year was the hardest. I would think about all the different milestones and seeing, you know, I have friends, like I said, who were pregnant at the same time and that they went on to have beautiful, healthy babies. And as amazing as it is to see them grow and reach these milestones, and it's awesome, they just turned a year old, and it's so great to see them growing up. But then there's that little pang in my heart that just mourns for our own baby, and that we didn't get a chance to witness those milestones with our own child. And of course, this is a little bit more raw because it is October, and this is the month that our baby would have been due. Our baby would be turning a year old this month. And so it's a little bit more raw. For the most part, I'm doing okay. I fully trust now that God has a plan and that it is going to be so much greater than we could ever understand. I also believe that the things I go through are for a reason, and that I'm able to better support people that are going through different bouts of grief, or just loss in general. So I know that things are for a reason, but that doesn't mean it's not hard sometimes. Anyway, that's my story. If you or someone you know or close to, friends, family, if someone has gone through pregnancy or infant loss, please take the time today to show them a little extra love, care for them, and make sure that they don't ever feel alone. So that's it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that it's helped someone in some way. I'm glad that I can share my story with you. I will be making new and happier videos for you coming up soon, so look forward to those. And just thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.